There was also where they were said to actually go into the graveyard, dig up an ancestor, and bring the head home to the afflicted individual, whatever their affliction was. They have to drink from the skull, and then they take the skull back and put it back in the graveyard before dawn. The next one, there was a young man about 15 years old in Scotland. I don't know exactly the time frame, but he had severe epilepsy, and their final measure, the biggest thing they could think to do, was get a chunk of a skull from another suicide, and they ground it into dust, and they made that into a drink for him. So he got to drink. Unfortunately, they didn't say if that actually cured him, which I'm guessing it probably didn't. And there's tales like this all over, specifically Scotland, actually, and Ireland, and also England. Let's see, according to myths and symbols in pagan Europe, the head appears to have been regarded as an object of power, bringing luck and strength into a house or increasing the holiness of a sanctuary. A further reason for valuing a severed head might be its association with divination, suggested by the part played by speaking or singing heads. So what would happen is they would take a head in battle, and then they would go to their celebratory feast and make offerings of, food and libations to it, and it would foretell, the future of the battle, of the war. It would sing, it would tell stories. Sometimes they didn't wait that long. Take them in battle, and they'd still be talking to their troops, telling them, what to do. To go back to Bran the Blessed, Linda did cover the wounded king, or the king, I can't remember the exact word she used, but blemished. That's the one. I can only think of something that didn't mean blemish. The blemished king. Since Bran was the first king of Britain, and he was poisoned by a poison arrow, not going into the whole long list of that one, he asked his men to cut his head off. His head lived for 80 years, and told stories, and drank, and he hung out with his men, until one day one of his men broke the spell, and they had to bury his head, which is supposed to be a white mountain in London, facing France, which is said to arise again when England most needs him. So being the first blemished king, of course, hit the land wastes when he wasted. A lot of the Welshmans kind of go into the King Arthur tales. Let's see. Some of the legends are based on the 14th, well, of course I say it's Welsh, and then I move into my next thing, which is a French medieval manuscript. But what happened with that is that King Amangons fell in love with a well maiden, obviously another sovereignty land goddess, and they would offer the hospitality of the well with a chalice to whoever passed by and needed that hospitality. Well, Amangons fell in love with one, and she wouldn't go with him because obviously, she's a goddess at least, or a land spirit of some type. And so he defiled her and then killed her and took her grail. Well, Bran at this time, or King Arthur at this time, is the blemished king. The land is wasting, so it's wholesale slaughter on these maidens. So, in the Welsh version of the kind of Grail quest, Purder, also known as Percival, is treated to a feast at a hall, and he sees pages bearing a severed head, which in the myth I read, there was no reason given, but there's somehow this strong association with the Holy Grail and the severed head, and of course holy wells and cauldrons. And the folks in England like to include the head, and you probably can't see them from back there, but all of these are heads. They've incorporated them on churches in England, in Europe, all those lovely Gothic cathedrals and stuff. Most of them have heads, and sometimes it'll be like this little tiny head over here, while you have this big scene with Jesus and Mary over here or something. And when you get down to it, spells are pop culture. Like I said at the beginning, everything has a spell on it. You have Ed Hardy and his Tattoo the World. He's kind of the guy that does all the skulls and all that fun stuff. That mean I have 2 minutes? Okay, I may only have 2 minutes.
2 to 5.
5? Okay. Well, in 2007, Damien Hirst he bought a skull in a taxidermy shop, had it cast in platinum and encrusted with diamonds. Looks much like this one. This one's not as plastic. But he called it For the Love of God. So the skull is something that has been revered, venerated through all the history of mankind. And I was going to touch upon the Skull and Bones group at Yale. They were founded in 1832, and they're actually said to have Geronimo's head, and stole it supposedly in 1918. Geronimo's descendants, believe it enough, they're suing them to get it back. Now, I wanted to, we have all this wonderful information, and it's been something going on for centuries. But what do you do with this knowledge? Because I believe the pagans did have something that they did with it. And I believe it's ancestor worship, and we're getting totally into my belief. I have no historical basis for any of this part. But on all of my altars, I have skulls. In my little porta druids, I have skulls. The one that Linda gave me ages ago has a little skull in it now. When I think of a triskelion, I think of a skull, being in the eye, 2 swirls at the top and 1 at the bottom being the mouth, which to me means the 3 worlds, the 3 kindreds, means travel. It means, to me, divination, contact with the other world. And if you think about it, the skulls are the remnant of somebody who's gone there. So I think there's some connection that way. Let's see. How much time do we have? 2 minutes? Okay. I've heard of some groups that do a plaster skull. They paint plaster skulls. And I think that would actually be a great treasure for somebody, to have the skull that Grandma painted. Or I'm actually fortunate enough to have one that my dad painted for Halloween, which, I treasure. I'm like, that's his dad. He's, look at what he did. This, it's kind of silly looking and all that, but I love it. Personally, I don't think there's anything creepy about skulls. It's an ancestor. It's somebody who loved and lost and lived before you. So, I think they are worthy of honor, and I honor them. And I think death is the great equalizer, because we all go there in the end. We can't get out of that one, not even Bill Gates. So at this time, I'd like to open the floor for some questions. Yes?
Why is it in our society, though, that evil or poison has got a skull and a bone?
The question was, I don't know if everyone heard, was why in our culture would poison specifically be symbolized by a skull and crossed bones? And I can only say for that, I believe it's death. I mean, you look at it and you're like, oh, look, there's a skull and crossbones. That means death. Perhaps I shouldn't drink that or eat that. Any others? Yes?
Is there any affiliation with shrunken heads?
There are tribal cultures that did take heads with and they had the shrunken heads, which is a very long process, which I was going to insert in this, and I was like, oh, no, that's too much. As far as I know, they believed the same, that they would acquire the strength of that person into themselves. I don't know if they had the same kind of venerations that the Celts did. I don't know if I'm sure they must have, but as soon as they figured out tourists wanted shrunken heads, they started killing people and making shrunken heads. So, any other thoughts? Yes?
So, since lopping off heads or turning around my nana's skull in today's practice might not be so acceptable, what would you suggest for someone who's trying to incorporate skulls and ancestor worship as a substitute to going to the mausoleum or going and cutting off your neighbor's head?
Some neighbors, rich neighbors in your bit. Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. And for those of you who may not not heard, her question was kind of, how do you make it into a practice for today without actually going and lopping off your neighbor's head? And conveniently, you can buy a skull at Walgreens at Halloween for $5. Yeah, he's not real, and it may not be the same feel, but you could definitely do, like I said, a rite or celebration at Samhain, where you have your family paint one, and they just paint whatever they want to on it, and I think that would, definitely imbue some power into that. Also, one thing we did at Desert Magic was we made masks, so you could have a mask made, and then we did a ritual where we kind of felt or sought out what potential ancestor would be or spirit would be in the mask or communicating via the mask. So you could do something like that. I always thought it would be cool to take a skull and put black mirrors in the eyes and use it for divination. I've not actually done that yet, though. Any other questions? All right. Well, for like the healing. All right. She had mentioned that what she felt that perhaps the Celts were doing by having people drink from the skulls, I'm paraphrasing if I'm incorrect, please let me know, was the salts in the skull and the bones, and also probably the calcium. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, there's 12 homeopathic salts.
She says there's 12 homeopathic salts, so
The 12 salts.
okay, the 12 salts in the earth.
Yeah, because that stuff might see you go away.
Ah, okay. She was saying that there are the 12 homeopathic salts in the earth, and that helped your sisters go away. All right, so that could be what they were after. It's definitely a long way around to get it. Yes.
Yeah, I don't remember where I heard this, but I read somewhere that the skull and crossbones logo was first used by the Knights Templar because after most of them were massacred by the Pope's forces in the 1500s, the survivors were looking for revenge, and they started carrying out acts of piracy, again, not just against any ships, but just against ships loyal to the Catholic Church. And then a few centuries later, the same symbols started getting used by pirates that would just go after any merchant ships.
That I really can't speak to because I don't know a whole lot about the Knights Templar. I've not actually studied them very much.
Actually, there's a few interesting connections there. The Knights Templar were ostracized for worshiping Baphomet, and Baphomet was not originally the symbol we associate today. It was originally a head.
I have no knowledge of that one. I'll have to research that when I get home, but I appreciate you bringing that up. That's interesting. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? Death threats? Rotten fruit? No. I think that's about it for me. And I have a couple of resources up here. Barry Cunliffe's Celtic World, which I bought because it was pretty. But that's actually a pretty good book. And Stony Days, which has got a lot of information about all kinds of heads, specifically carved ones, all over England, Britain, all over. So feel free to come up and take a look. Just don't take them.